A fleet of obsidian longships creaks into the purple void, shields clattering and runelight crawling along black hulls as choruswood oars pulse with teleportation energy. Captain Gjorn bellows a command into the empty air. There is no water, only the end, and this Viking armada intends to conquer it. Around them, the endless purple scatters into blocky stars, each a lower's square twinkling like a distant torch. The longships ride not on waves, but on a teleporting sheer of ender energy oars dip into nothing and reappear like punched-out planks, shifting through a seam in reality. Gjorn stands at the prow, a square-jawed, beard-block captain whose helmet glow is more decorative than practical. His rune-carved eye patch occasionally flickers with navigation glyphs. He squints with a single blocky eye and shouts, "Steady," which in End means nothing, and in Old Norse roughly translates to "don't aggro the shulker." Behind him, shields rattle like clattering chests, painted with angry creeper faces and runes that insist on being dramatic. Oarsmen are a mixture of actual Vikings and villagers who signed up for the promise of iron and mead. Half of them are enchanted skeleton mercenaries, because Minecraft logic is efficient and morally ambiguous. They chant sea shanties that sound suspiciously like Ender lullabies, a few bars lower, which makes the Endermen blink in rhythm and cover their eyes with tall pixel hands. The End landscape unfurls like a minimalist painting. Islands of obsidian and chorus plants, towers of End stone rising like lonely totems, and distant pillars with crystals that hum in monophonic monotone. The armada aims for a pillar. Gjorn declares it a target the way a Viking declares breakfast, loudly and with dramatic stabbing motions. A small, competent Enderman materializes on the deck and tilts its blockhead. It speaks not in words, but in an accusing ripple of teleport noise, and Gjorn answers with a single syllable that is mostly confidence. "HRK," he says, the Viking equivalent of all hands, prepare to mildly inconvenience a tower. They maneuver, slow and deliberate obsidian keels scrape fragrant chorus blocks with a sound like a tired piano. Twists appear. One crewman is actually an iron golem retired to the Sea of End. Wearing a sarcastic sailor hat, another is an unnervingly polite pillager who keeps apologizing for setting off minor void sirens. The armada's strategy is textbook Viking. Get close, make a fuss, crack things open, hold a very shouty meeting on top of the structure. But physics in the End is stubbornly Minecraft. Bridges appear only where players once built them, and hostile mobs have an odd sense of property. As the first longship draws level with a crystal pillar, chorus vines tangle with oar handles, and a chorus plant sneezes audibly, producing a shower of notes that could be mistaken for a harp hit. An ender dragon voice echoes distantly like someone calling roll in a cavernous gym. Uninterested, grand, mildly inconvenienced. The captain consults a map carved on parchment like obsidian. The map is wrong because Gjorn's nephew moved a village 2 updates ago, and nobody updated the legends. A plucky villager points at a tiny island and mispronounces and dish directions, sending the fleet on a charming detour through a chorus grove that smells faintly of burnt toast. They find a piece of technical absurdity. The longship's obsidian hulls attract Endermen like moths, and Gjorn has to invent a ritual involving mead, a wooden bucket, and interpretive dance to explain non-hostility. The ritual works badly at first, and Enderman mistakes the bucket for a musical instrument and starts a duet with the skeleton drummer. Somewhere in the distance, a chorus fruit pops loudly and teleports a sleepy oarsman into a lily-pad of end stone. He surfaces calm, holding a fish he did not catch. The dragon circle grows nearer, shadow blocks fall like a cloud of bad omens, and suddenly a small choir of Endermen harmonize in dismay. An audacious plan is hatched. They will sail straight to the central crystal, tie a chain of iron to it, and attempt to tow the dragon into a polite negotiation. Gjorn sketches the plan on a scrap of enchanted map. His handwriting looks suspiciously like rune graffiti, and the map points to a place called Maybe. A sudden comedic twist. The chain is made of the wrong material. It's actually a very large string of salmon, because someone in the supply tent misread a scroll labeled fishhooks. There is a brief, dignified meeting of the council. To resolve the fish chain problem, minutes are taken by a book that insists on writing haikus. Jorn reads the haikus aloud. They are unhelpful but poetically accurate about the smell of chorus leaves. As twilight in the end is weirdly constant, the fleet prepares siege engines assembled from redstone, a few anvils, and suspiciously boxy cows they call battle bovines. The cows are both brave and confused. One thinks it's a boat and cannot be dissuaded. They approach the central crystal. The dragon's shadow is an enormous, pixelated hand. Then, a soft, absurd note. An old war horn plays from somewhere inside an oarlock, and the entire armada pauses to listen, because music is a neutral truce. The Ender Dragon descends, curious more than angry, and the fleet holds its breath in a way only Blackentides can. Jorn steps forward, raises a cup of mead, and offers it with the solemnity of someone handing over a cursed item in a tutorial mission. The dragon sniffs, blows a gentle plume that warms the deck, and then does something unexpected. It coughs up a tiny, disgruntled parrot wearing a helmet. Everyone stares. The parrot squawks, "Polly wants a truce," which is not in any treaty but makes perfect narrative sense. A strategic pause follows. Jorn whispers an ancient warcry that, in the end, translates to "please be reasonable about the crystals." The dragon tilts its head, decides Vikings are interesting, and does the least expected move. It offers a single scale to Jorn like a dowry. Jorn accepts with an awkward bow, because accepting a dragon scale in the end counts as both diplomacy and tax compliance. From the pillar, a voice ancient and bored in tones that invasion by longships is inefficient, but charming it suggests a trade. Leave the obsidian and take a souvenir chorus. Jorn consults his map again this time. The map updates itself with a smug little pop, like a satisfied redstone torch. He nods and announces terms that are very Viking. A festival, a marketplace, and the ceremonial exchange of helmets that fit over square heads. An Endermite, tiny and impertinent, is elected mayor because democracy in the end is procedurally generated. The fleet celebrates. Jorn ponders what victory means. Obsidian glinting like midnight shields, the longships drift into a sky made of blocky blackness where stars are square and very stern, icy cold tonight. Bjorn Blockbeard squints through pixels, his beard a matrix of cracked obsidian plates clinking like distant anvils against the hush of void wind, and very dramatic. Around him, 10 hulls breathe like sleeping monsters, each carved from midnight glass that sounds suspiciously smug whenever waves of nothing slap it and yawn. They call this flotilla the Obsidian Armada because Viking builders enjoy dramatic names, and because obsidian is what you reach for when fortifying grief daily. Gudrun, the quick-fingered navigator, pins a map on a mast, the map pixel-rumpled and dotted with purple portals, arrows, and several regrettable doodles of sheep. Her sextant is an enchanted ender pearl mounted on a stick, wobbling like a conscience and glowing a questionable green whenever someone lies about loot. Rowers are a chorus of muffled shouts and blocky motions, oars clack like chisels, and occasionally detonate small existential questions in perfect rhythm for entertainment. Each ship carries a unique cargo: obsidian barrels of torches, crates labeled respectfully contraband, and a single cow staring into the void as if memorizing. Gudrun barks a plan spoken like law. When in doubt, anchor to a chorus plant, which is both practical and poetic for a Viking navigator. The first night they cross, the void plays tricks with depth perception. Distances stretch like rubber maps and islands wink out like tired players logging. They set sails made of enchanted banners stitched from rescued bed sheets. These flutter with effervescence whenever an Enderman blinks in nearby darkness and hum. A cargo of enchanted apples sits like diplomatic gifts, but someone misreads the runes, and a crate hums the tune of impending mild chaos soon. The crossing reveals an architecture of loneliness. Floating islands with single trees, bridges crumbled into pixel dust, and statues of forgotten miners pointing accusingly always. Endermen watch from a respectful distance, long limbs folded into awkward, polite poses, eyes like tiny purple lanterns of suspicion and sympathy and mild amusement. A sudden ripple of sound arrives. The Ender Dragon practices scales on a distant ridge, humming a lullaby to its echo and rather off-key beautifully. Bjorn attempts diplomacy by launching a bouquet of banners tied to a chicken flaps. Banners ripple, and Dragon writes them off as piffle amusing. Night falls like an update patch, stars recompile, and occasional glitch sparks pop where two chunks refuse to be neighbors, creating small, polite void bridges for travel. Gudrun instructs a crew to plant chorus roots as anchors the roots coil like sleepy tentacles, singing low notes that make obsidian hulls vibrate approval. An oarsman named Torfi hums oddly specific sea shanties about gravel, and the crew begins to suspect Torfi might be a gullible sort of seer. Suddenly, a brilliant column of purple light screams upward. It's a portal staircase, spiraling like confectionery, and the armada adjusts course toward its euphoric glow. They approach the portal cautiously because one does not swagger into Ender staircases, because Bjorn tried swaggering and fell into a lake of phantom fish. At the portal's lip, the air tastes like old redstone, nostalgia, and a faint hint of lemon. Crew members sniff, nod, and rearrange their helmets. They drift through the portal like ships through a curtain. Pixels ripple as the world tilts with the sense of someone changing channel quite deliberately. Emerging into the end is like stepping onto a stage lit by nostalgia bulbs. Everything is overlit, dramatic, slightly theatrical, and suspiciously devoid of talk. Islands float like forgotten keystrokes, connected by trembling bridges of crystal. Some players have tried to graft cafes here and failed spectacularly every time, beautifully. Endermen freeze when they see ships. Their necks crane, faces blink, and they hold impromptu conferences behind small obsidian hedges about decor and ancient theft. A chorus plant overreacts, singing like a kettle and producing a tiny staircase. Merchant barters a crate of glowstone for the first rung with gusto. The armada anchors between two islands, and the hulls creak like old libraries. Someone reads aloud from a manual titled How to Reason with Dimensions. A minor mutiny occurs when Torfi declares that the cow should be promoted to first mate on account of excellent staring technique and dignity always. Gudrun negotiates with practiced patience, citing ancient Viking laws and newer patch notes. Nobody interprets either particularly well, but everyone applauds the effort and cries. At dawn, someone spots a silhouette on the horizon. It's neither dragon nor island, but a massive obsidian gate, towering and humming like an argument. The gate's surface is veined with purple light that moves like slow veins of music. Ships draw near, and the crew instinctively swallows their spoons. Bjorn steps forward, clutching a hammer that is mostly symbolic and partly a crafting recipe. He bangs the gate once and waits for paperwork politely. The gate responds with bureaucracy. A small pop-up appears listing terms, an ominous checkbox, and a polite quiz about personal ethics involving sheep and consent. Gudrun fills answers with bold honesty and questionable grammar, checking boxes about dragon etiquette and whether cows prefer titles or snacks, and occasionally existential reassurance. With a bureaucratic sigh, the gate opens into a corridor of floating sconces. The air smells faintly of coal and delayed obligations and mild regret. The corridor leads to a chamber where an Enderman clerk sits behind a desk, stamping things with infinite seriousness and ridiculously tiny glasses on insistence. Dialogue is brief. Bjorn mutters by Odin, and the Enderman files it under folk expressions alongside notes about soil etiquette and minor disputes involving torches. They secure permits, a paper trail of oddly poetic legitimacy, and the armada is assigned a single corridor slot and 3 complimentary void biscuits each. Motley crew members nibble biscuits and exchange whispered theories about why the end prefers dramatic entrances and why dragons collect crowns for very good reasons. A small party volunteers to scout ahead. They carry lanterns, a suspiciously diplomatic sheep, and a map with annotations like avoid political conversations with purples. They step into a vast arena where the ender dragon circles like an impatient conductor, and the ground hums with the memory of boss fights. The armada lines up like an argument. Oars at attention, crew members clutch tools that double as instruments and occasionally as emotional support and courage. Gudrun raises a horn of fermented chorus fruit, declares a speech about exploration and awkward diplomacy, and then admits she hopes the cows survive unscathed. As they push deeper, the Obsidian fleet feels like relic and experiment. The void watches, the dragon yawns, and the next choice will ask everything. The Obsidian longships cut the void like black teeth through a purple soup of stars, a fleet that looked, from a brittle distance, like a funeral procession for common sense. Ragnar Blackblock stood at the prow of the lead ship, one boot on carved obsidian, one hand on a helm rimmed with end stone runes, and he looked absurdly pleased. His beard was a cascade of pixel beads, and his helmet had a skylight for thinking. The camera of imagination swooped in close, and you could see the tiny blocky rivulets of lava hardened into an elegant crackle across the hull. This was no fluke. These were longships built by stubborn craftsmanship and stubborner logic, ships that refused to sink, because Minecraft physics had been bribed with enchantments. The void outside the hull was a blank, echoing nothing, punctuated by floating chorus gardens and the occasional drifting island of flint. The wind had no sound here, because sound is polite enough to die in the void. So the only music was the scrape of oars against obsidian and the soft clink of ender pearls rotating in glass jars like a captain's rum. Short scene. Close-up of an oar. It's carved like a dragon's spine and labeled TAXED with glory and runes that no one reads anymore. Next beat. The sail, improbably woven from chorus flower silk, bellows with a purple whisper. Even cloth here sounds like it's telling secrets to the underspace. Ragnar pointed. Not because he needed to, the fleet was a procession with its own will, but because pointing makes a leader look purposeful on camera. By Odin, he said, which was only partly accurate in a dimension that respected neither Odin nor common sense. Someone in the crew muttered something about converting Odin into a banner pattern. A laugh, short, crooked like a pickaxe's tooth, passed through the crew. Their faces were carved from iron, wood, and stubbornness. A carpenter was also a poet, sort of. The ships moved in a formation that suggested they had practiced the choreography of doom. Every few seconds, the narrator voice in your head flips to documentary mode. There are 3 basic tactics when crossing the void in Obsidian longships. 1. Remain unreasonably confident and make lots of hand gestures. 2. Conserve your ender pearls for emergency teleportation and for emergencies that are not actually emergencies yet. 3. Never, ever mention that obsidian is heavy and the void respects rules it does not have. The fleet followed all 3 tactics with the solemnity of Banker's visual beat. A stray Enderman floats by on the horizon like a black telephone pole, blinking at the armada as if trying to decide whether to take a boat home. It teleports away when one cabin boy, who had mistakenly worn a pumpkin like a nature enthusiast, sneezed. The sneeze made an echo that politely disturbed the void. The Enderman, offended, whispered, "Oof," and left. The comedic gravity of the scene is that even the creatures here had a sense of decorum below deck. The crew fed the ship with blocks of obsidian, because this is a world where carpentry resembles geology. They hammered in a rhythm that you could map on a music staff, if you were into that sort of madness. Each block was cursed with an enchantment someone called buoyancy, which is not a real enchantment in the usual sense, but in this narrative it is. Sparks of purple, like tiny auroras, ran along the seams, and the ships experienced a low, satisfied hum. A small goat with diamond horns stuck its head through a porthole and declared that it liked the hum, if only because it made its ears tingle. The ships had personalities. The flagship was named Eskejald, and it had the air of someone who considered itself slightly better than weather. The second ship, Helg, liked to whistle off-key and occasionally shed a block of gravel for comic relief. The smallest vessel, a nimble craft only slightly resembling a dinghy, was cheekily named Skim. It had a nether brick toddler stuck to its bow that shouted strategies like row north and invest in archery. As the fleet neared the end, the atmosphere, such as it was in a dimension with no atmosphere, thickened. The horizon became a studded disk, end islands in the distance, like monasteries of stone and chorus plants. A chorus tree loomed like a temple, but with the sense that it was going to hand you a riddle and then charge admission. The first contact with end space was short and startling, a rain of small, harmless blocks that turned out to be intentional. Someone had thrown flint into the sky as a prank. Another quick beat. A pair of shulkers popped open on a drifting islet and peered at the ships with suspicion. The shulkers did that slow, mechanical opening like drawer lids, and then closed again. Clearly unimpressed by Viking craftsmanship, there was strategy beyond whimsy. Ragnar had studied end charts like a cartographer who also liked to doodle dragons in the margins. He had memorized the currents, if currents could be said to exist in a place where everything floats politely. There were ender currents, like invisible streams, and if you caught one correctly, you could ride it like a wave. The armada aligned, drifting into a purple crosswind situation that made the chorus sails shimmer. The maneuver looked like synchronized swimming practiced by dwarves. Just as they gained momentum, the fleet told itself a joke to keep morale high. It was a trad Viking gag. What do you call a boat made of obsidian? Pause. A literal heavy metal. Laughter erupted, canned and sincere. A parrot, a blocky parrot, because why not repeated heavy metal, and then flew into a pile of chorus leaves in embarrassment. Comic beats like these kept the mood bright, which is essential when you're traveling into a place where geometry is suspicious. A small crisis punctuated the comedy. A minor creak became a major forewarning. One of the longships, Helg, snagged on a floating tendril of chorus plant. The tendril wound around the keel with the patient grip of a librarian who knows your overdue sins. Crewmen scrambled. An oarsman, who had once been a tailor and thus deeply literate in knots, shouted, "Cut it or sing it." They opted to cut it, but not before someone took a second to sing a sea shanty that made the chorus leaves tremble in appreciation. The tendril let go, apparently a fan of human voices, and Helg jolted free like a dog after a tick. This near miss introduced a twist. The end's defenses were subtle and almost bureaucratic. Instead of immediate aggression, it used entanglements, tests of patience, and theological riddles about whether your crew truly loved the horizon. The fleet continued, hearts pounding but drums at rest. On the deck, a child of the crew, no older than a fresh-spawned cube, produced a small, glowing ender pearl. It rolled it across the deck like a marble and declared, "If we use it, we jump." The captain's stare hardened into something cinematic. Decisions were weighed like anvils. Ragnar considered the pearl and the possible outcomes. He imagined their landing, a ringed island, dragon-scarred architecture, and the Endermen staring like upright cacti in suits. He imagined the absurd bureaucrats of the end, sipping void tea and stamping papers. More seriously, he imagined conquest. Obsidian longships could hold, could batter, and could withstand boredom. But the end had rules that didn't exist in other realms. Unpredictability was its only constante. Voice, small and oddly nervous, piped up from the rail. "Are we sure Obsidian will impress them?" A laugh escaped Ragnar like a battle horn made of chuckles. "It will confuse them," he said. "Confusion is half victory." The statement was both strategy and philosophy. As the fleet rounded a slow-rotating chorus island, the light changed. The purple glow sharpened into something that looked like expectation. They crossed a final, thin seam of void before the true end cluster, a shimmering line that suggested a curtain. The ships passed through with a ceremonial groan of wood and stone, and the camera, our internal documentary camera, drew back. Ships, small against the cathedral islands, cut across a checkerboard sky. The mood shifted from jaunty defiance to a quieter, bracing wonder. The lead ship's figurehead, a carved raven made of deep obsidian flecked with end stone, tilted its head, as if in approval or to belch a prophecy. The crew straightened. The goats halted their chewing. Silence in the void, rare and potent, pressed like a hand on the wick of possibility. Ragnar stared forward, his face cast in purple glow, thinking of longships in fjords, of funerals and feasts, of the absurdity of bringing seafaring furniture into an airborne monastery. He felt something like the first pang of what conquest actually meant here. Not merely taking land, but negotiating with a cosmos that wore a tuxedo and filed forms. The armada had crossed the void, but what it had crossed into was not a place at all. It was a mood, an exam, and a puzzle box with teeth. As the obsidian fleet eased toward the first cluster of islands, the narrator voice lowers for emphasis and a little glee. The next moves would require more than brute weight and Viking bravado. They would need cunning, patience, and an ability to make friends with an entity that cared more for silence than spoons. The scene closes on Ragnar's profile, a blocky silhouette against the ends cathedral-like stacks, his breath a pixel mist that disappears instantly. He taps the helm. "Hold steady," he says softly. It is less an order and more a declaration of intent. The fleet answers with a low chorus hum, like a throat clearing before a long speech. And so they approached, obsidian hulls glinting, sails full of chorus wind, carrying not just men and goats but ideas of conquest, of misadventure, of a very particular brand of Scandinavian optimism. The void receded behind them, neatly folding like a map. Ahead lay the end, waiting in its purple suit, folding its hands as if it had been expecting them all along. The armada had crossed the void. What happened next would decide if Vikings could conquer a dimension that didn't believe in conquest. Obsidian hulls sliced across the cubesque black teeth against a field of stars, as Viking longships of obsidian cast off from the end's brittle shore. Captain Atraffin Blackgill stood at the stern, beard braided with chorus fruit and end stone dust, one square eye fixed on the distant citadel. The void smelled of charged stone, and old thunder shulker shells tinked like tiny bells as they struck the decks. This was not a coastal raid. This was an obsidian armada crossing the impossible nitros of oars, carved from crystal and nether bone, turned at Atraffin's nod. In the void, oars were ritual more than engine, but obsidian sails caught a thin dimensional breeze and whispered. Blocky ravens, basalt-carved and enchanted, flitted between masts, dropping tiny maps that unfurled as glowing runes. The crew was a peculiar lot, a shield maiden with a honeycomb helm, a skald with a lute shaped like an enchantment table, and Torfi, an ogre-sized deckhand who polished the figurehead with grim ceremony. "By Thor," Torfi said, peering over the rail. "Aye," Atraffin replied, voice like gravel and lightning. It was the single line that needed saying first beat. They passed islands of floating chorus trees, leaves like green static. Endermen watched from a distance, tall silhouettes like bored librarians. Small cubic meteors, chunks of crying obsidian, orbited like buoys. Atraffin maneuvered with the precision of an ice hall dance, masts creaking in minor chords that sounded suspiciously like shanties. Next beat. A vex with dragonfly wings zipped through the rigging and stole a cod. The skald tripped over chainmail, flew through the air, and landed in a pile of chorus fruit with a cartoonish squelch. Laughter, blocky, rolling, contagious, followed approach. The citadel grew enormous, its obsidian bones knitting a lattice of bridges and portals. End gateways blinked like lighthouses. Atraffin arranged the fleet into a formation he called Grandfather's Beard. Small ships tucked under the flagship's keel, an audacious geometry intended to confuse fate. They planned to use their keels as anchors, planting chorus spikes into floating platforms so the ships could brace against the citadel's shifting gravity. Then the citadel sang. A chorus hummed from its core, harmonics warping block shapes. Decks flexed like instruments. Oars trembled. Atrafin barked a command that became rhythm. Row, clap, listen. The crew clapped shield rims and matched the citadel's heartbeat. A black rain of obsidian shards fell, embedding into planks and drawing runes midair. The figurehead's mirror sheen reflected a distant ender dragon, circling high and amused. Its wings made wind that rocked the sails. A giant flag folding in slow-motion boarding here meant planting anchors into thought. The flagship cast spike anchors, chains of chorus pearls rattling. The keel gripped the citadel's outline, and for a suspended moment ship became bridge. A rare ender sheep teleported onto the deck, shook like a wet mop, ruined the stew, and then vanished with a sock and an enchanted note. Good luck. Torfi offered socks in apology. The flagship's stairs aligned like puzzle pieces, obsidian bricks sliding into the keel's silhouette. The deck tilted, became walkway, became siege tower as gravity bent politely. Atrafin stepped, each footfall a soft thunk of stone. Around him, the crew held a strange reverence. Endermen approached, but not as foes. They bore chorus fiber banners and offered gifts. A moonlight folding map, a dragon bone shard, and a glyph note. We did not expect guests. Atrafin accepted with a deep, rumbling toast, offering prismarine mead. An Enderman tried it, coughed politely, drifted away giggling. Then an absurd clerkender floated into view, typewriter voice announcing permit at Welve. Longship passage. A giant approved stamp dropped with ceremony. Atrafin produced a stamped logbook, neatly filed under preparedness. The archway of obsidian swallowed them, corridors folding like a night Rubik's cube, halls rearranging with geological indifference. Atrafin felt consequence settle like a cloak on his shoulders. He looked at the Scald, at Torfi with his sock, at ravens dropping maps. Each obsidian block hummed with possibility. Deeper, the music shifted into a minor key. Then an impossible piano note chimed, a single coin drop in the midnight. Atrafin paused, hand on his oar, and laughed, part triumph, part worry, part sheer delight. He turned to whatever audience might be watching beyond the Cubeski and said, simply, "We came to conquer the end's silence." Instead, we found company. The longships drifted forward, keels scraping soft on stone, the obsidian flag snapping once in a wind smelling of embers and salt. Behind them, the void folded like a book, closed with a satisfied sigh. Ahead, the citadel's inner halls yawned open, indifferent and endless. A small sound broke the hush, a metal clang that echoed like a dropped coin. It came from below, a subterranean rumble that suggested gears and long-forgotten doors. Atrafin signaled. Torches, not the end's pale chorus light, but old flame, warmed and smoky, were lit, and suddenly the citadel corridors felt like an ancient hall back home. They moved in beats, the Scald's lute marking steps, Torfi hauling a crate labeled emergency rubber duckies. Someone snorted, someone else quietly admired the logistics. Atrafin kept his eyes ahead, but his mind noted everything. The angle of the stone, the peculiar way chorus echoes bent around corners, the gentle thrum that matched a hidden clockwork deep in the walls. In a small chamber, they found a library of blocks, books made of obsidian chips, scrolls of chorus fiber, and a globe that showed the end as a spiral of doorways. An old Enderman librarian adjusted his spectacles, fashioned from two rimless pearls, and said softly, "You read like sailors." Atrafin smiled, and the Scald scribbled a verse that rhymed oddly with hollow stones. A twist. The citadel's heart was not a treasure hoard, but a conservatory of sounds. Each corridor preserved a note, a laugh, a footstep recorded and looped like a living jukebox. Here the end kept memory as music, and the ships found themselves listening to centuries of echoes. Atrafin ran a hand along a shelf, plucked a note,